outstanding and world-class vision and world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused.
Good evening, EduFolk, and welcome to The Late Show with Hannah Wilson and Lucy Neuburger. We're back again, Hannah. We've been allowed back. We've
in demand.
Yeah. How many shows is this now?
Are we on 4 or 5?
Something like that. So we're going
if
strong.
If we count Education Tonight takeover, then
that was our first foray into this whole double act, wasn't it? So it was and we've been allowed to stick with it. So I'm very happy about that. How are you doing? All good?
Yeah, I'm all good. I'm a bit knackered. I'm not going to lie. First few weeks back, I feel a bit brain fried with the amount of overload of work. But yeah, getting back into the swing of it this week.
Fabulous. Anything gone particularly well so far this week, or just kind of steady eddying it so far?
I'd probably say my lovely year 10s I've been teaching. We spent 2 hours drawing an eye, which I'm trying to teach them to slow down, and actually things take time and they're not quick, but actually they're all like super proud of it now they've actually done it. So yeah. Excited so beings that they are.
The art of slowing down. Fabulous. Well, I think my sort of, because I'm obviously not in school at the moment. So today I've watched some TED Talks, and mostly actually to link to what we're talking about this evening, which is Neuroaffirming Practices. And we will come on to all this, and all this will be explained to you by our delightful guest, Simon Airy, who we will get on momentarily. But before we do that, we have to do a little bit of housekeeping first, I'm afraid, and introduce you to the lovely sponsors for this show. So first up is John Catt Educational, who still are supplying us with, still supplying us with a lovely discount. See there. John Catt are offering you 20% off with our code JCTTR2425. And that offers you a discount across the entire range of the books on that website. And I went and had a nosy the other day. Any area of education, including neurodivergence, so ADHD, and all the things that we're going to talk about this evening, all sorts of books on that, all the way through to retrieval practice, to a whole manner of other things. So do go and have a look. It's still early in the year, so you can treat yourself, treat your school CPD library, and just get up on your reading. So that is that one. Next up, we have Future and Careers, and they provide a wealth of stimulating resources aimed at encouraging 14 to 19-year-olds to pursue careers in STEM and SHAPE. They help teachers to show their students what they can aim for and how. From articles to activity sheets, animations to podcasts, all the resources align with Gatsby benchmarks and are free to download. And you can do that at futureandcareers.com, and you can subscribe today, or indeed anytime. And finally, we have Reading Solutions UK, and it is the home of Dreambox Reading Plus, the online reading development program. Create stronger readers in your school from Key Stage 2 to beyond GCSE using Reading Plus's evidence-based adaptive technology. Reading Plus accurately assesses your students' skills gaps and places them on personalised learning pathways built to accelerate their strengths and improve on their areas for development. You can try the program with a free 4-week pilot today. Search Reading Solutions UK to find their website and request your free pilot. Now, I appreciate that's a lot of information. We will go back through that again partway through the show as well if you missed out on any of that. But without further ado, it's now time for me to draw breath and to bring on our lovely guest for this evening, unless I've missed any other life admin that we need to do first, Hannah. Nope, we're ready to go. Fabulous. And just like magic, there he is. Good evening, Simon. How are you doing?
I'm good, Lucy. Hi, Hannah. How are you? I'm all good, thanks.
Good. Now, Simon, before we kind of go any further, I've already sort of mentioned that this show is going to be about neuroaffirming practices, neurodivergence, but we'd like you to introduce yourself first.
Yeah, so I've been teaching for 25 years now, and all of those years have been between teaching little ones, little two-year-olds, all the way up to year 4, which are 8 and 9-year-olds. I've done a mixture of class teaching. I've been a subject lead, early years lead, SLT. Currently, I am a supply teacher, or as I prefer to call, I call it visiting teacher rather than supply, because visiting, it makes more sense to the children when they know a teacher's visiting them for the day. And at the moment, my main role is as an intervention teacher, working with a group of early years children based on speech and language, emerging neurodivergence, and physical development as well.
Oh, fantastic. So you've had a broad and interesting career. And this is one that's or a subject matter that's sort of interesting for both Hannah and for me, having experienced neurodivergence ourselves, and certainly working with a number of children over the years who are neurodivergent, whether diagnosed or not. So for those who are unclear on, because some people might not have a clue what we are talking about, because I actually only found this out today, and Hannah, I don't know if you know this as well, but neurodivergent or neurodivergence doesn't have a kind of concrete definition. So what does it mean to you, Simon?
I think, the word neuro actually comes under a lot of terminology. When we think of neurodivergent, I associate being neurodivergent with a person. So a person can be neurodivergent as opposed to being neurotypical. So that would mean that with all humans, there's a diversity of the human mind. We think and act and we present in different ways. And associated with that, we can have people who are neurodivergent can have neurotypes. So, for example, they could be autistic. They could be autistic and ADHD with two neurotypes. But it's important for me to say that a lot of people, when they hear the word neurodivergent or neurodiversity, they always think autism and ADHD, the two most common neurotypes, when actually it covers a much more broader set of neurotypes. Things such as, OCD, dyslexia, oppositional defiance disorder, PDA, lots and lots of things that cover neurodiversity. And there's a lot to get your head around, because I had a look this afternoon just to check the terminology, because I don't want to be using the wrong terminology when it comes to this particular subject. And it brings together the neuroaffirming practice, which is the basis of our conversation, where I see that term neuroaffirming practice as something being inclusive, it's strengths-based, and it's almost the people within the education system, they acknowledge there's a difference in how people work and how children work, or how children operate, or how they behave. So I think there's a lot there. And I think there's also a lot of stuff coming out constantly about neurodiversity as well. So it's an area that's constantly, I feel, it's developing.
Sorry, Hannah, were you going to say something?
We're both going to go in for a question then.
No,
okay. Because that's my thing, is obviously at school I was diagnosed with dyslexia very early. Obviously that one's quite an easy to pick up on, because obviously spelling, I would join words up together. I couldn't spell to save my life. Everything was phonetic. And even I remember that, when you get told to write out your spellings, I wrote THAY, to the point where my teacher made me write it out 100 times. And halfway through, I swapped back to THAY and wrote it out 50 times the wrong way. I was just so unaware of what I was doing. And every English teacher was always like, do you read through your work? And I was like, yeah, I do. But to me, it made sense. I completely could read it through. And I'm still very traumatized from the spelling tests, where our teacher said, if we all got 30 out of 30, you should stand on the table, do the can and buy us all McDonald's. And one week I got 29 and everyone else got 30. But otherwise I got nowhere close. And I'm still traumatized by it. But obviously I was diagnosed with that very early on. But it's only been the last few years and going through the diagnosis with my son that I've realized actually I've got a lot of ADHD kind of traits. And obviously we know, especially with girls, we don't really tend to have the kind of fidget side of it or the active part. So therefore, we're quite often forgotten or misdiagnosed and stuff. But do you think there's genuinely kind of this trend of there being people with more different neurodivergence, and we're seeing that big increase? Or is it that they just weren't being diagnosed before?
Exactly what I was going to ask. You've read my mind.
Yeah, I think there's a big increase at the moment with adults, particularly who are in their 30s and 40s, realizing that they have neurodivergent traits about them. And for me, I completely resonate with what you said, Hannah, about the dyslexia and at school, because if I track back some of my behaviors when I was a child, I was labeled shy, quiet, reserved, when actually those things are actually social anxiety. I have an absolute, I know it's really hard to describe, but I wouldn't go to a party. I've been to parties in the past, but I'm masking my way through those events to get through it. And I realize now that it wasn't shy or quiet at all. There was something else there. And I think it's only within the last few years that we're even talking about, we're using those words as neurodiversity, etc. But I think that there has been a big increase in people realizing what it is and people doing more things about it. So I think there's an increase of educators within schools. They're seeing these neurotypes in action in their classrooms, and they're making the referrals. And it's the same with adults as well. I mean, I'm in the system. I'm waiting for an appointment with the clinic, but then I equate it to, I think there's a wider issue in terms of, I think particularly within this, for example, in this borough that I'm in Lambeth, I know there's a shortage of educational psychologists at the moment, and they're one of the key people that would diagnose a person's neurotype. And I think with the increased people that are being referred or referring themselves, coupled with the system itself, waiting lists are long, they're too long. And in the meantime, teachers and educators have children in their class in mainstream who have neurotypes, and the struggle is what to do to ensure that those children succeed.
Because I think there's still, as much as the awareness is increasing, I sort of haven't noticed I think the sea, or I hope the kind of the sea changes is coming. I do believe, in your case in point, that there are teachers hard at work trying to make their classrooms as neurodivergent friendly or as neuroaffirming as possible. But it's very difficult when you're confronted with a class of 30 children, many of which will have either diagnosed or undiagnosed neurodivergences, to kind of begin to sort of look at what a classroom setup or what a classroom or a class day looks like. So I suppose what I want to ask you next is, do you think that is the case, or do you think that that maybe I'm sort of off the beaten track here a little bit, and actually there's more work being done, and actually, the sea change is already happening?
I think what you said was right. I think there's pockets of it happening, maybe bigger pockets in some places than others. But I think it's frustrating because, I meet some teachers on my travels and some educators on my travels that, you see elements of neuroaffirming practice in absolute action. And unfortunately, sometimes you see that it isn't prioritized. So you have those children, those neurodivergent children or emerging neurodivergent children within the class. And, then sometimes I think people haven't had the training or the stuff to be equipped with in order to provide that neuroaffirming environment. I mean, I myself, a lot of stuff I've done is more self-taught rather than accessing stuff. There's stuff that I've accessed and paid for it for myself because I know that that's worthwhile training to have. But I think for majority of people, I think the key point is there's a lack of access to training.
And is it like one of those that because we're potentially neurodivergent and we are kind of potentially more understanding, do you think neurotypical people are able to understand kind of the struggles that the neurodivergent students kind of go through? Because I think I've always Tom's going to kill me, but they always behave for me because I feel like I relate to them and I understand their behavior, because I can understand where it's coming from and I get it. So therefore I'm able to kind of de-escalate it because I can see what the issue is that's coming from it. So is it that kind of neurotypical staff potentially are the ones that need more training, and actually that's where kind of there's the issue and those kids kind of struggle in school because there isn't that understanding? Or do you think like it's just generally as teachers we all kind of get it? But do you think that neurodivergent staff tend to kind of bond better and are able to help those students more?
There's a lot I agree with in what you said, in the fact that, I've had it commented on a lot in the past that I bond with those children who are, it would have been SEND or now I would say neurodivergent. And I think what you said, Hannah, brings another sort of bigger point in the issue of behaviour. Because the biggest shift for me was, I've been down the road of, having, behaviour charts, behaviour ladders, thunder, rain, sunshine, all of that business as well, timeout, all of that stuff. And actually now I know that doesn't work at all, because it takes away from what the child needs the most, which is connection. The children need to connect and feel safe in that environment. And I think we have to realise that behaviour isn't something that we manage, we support it. We need to know that whatever the child is displaying is that form of communication that you mentioned. And I think using sort of the iceberg model of, we see the behaviour, but underneath that behaviour is feeling or feelings and needs, and it's our job to work out what they are in order to support them, which I think is more not just a neurotypical adult thing to do. I think everybody needs that sort of almost that shift from seeing that we have to manage behaviour rather than managing behaviour, we need to support it.
I do think that's interesting, because I've always felt iffy about the word manage and management. I know, of course, we refer to it ourselves when we talk about senior management and senior, but it should be kind of senior leadership, really. I mean, there's often more managing than leading. I say often, sometimes more managing than leading happening, but certainly in terms of classroom setup and classroom support, this idea, of a more supportive approach rather than the kind of the sort of the managing almost has that negative connotation. That's really, I hadn't sort of thought about that in a while. So that's really, really interesting. Now we've been throwing around this word neuroaffirming, and again, it's another one we probably need to define a little bit better. So in your mind, Simon, when you talk about something that's neuroaffirming or neuroaffirming practice, what does that mean to you?
I think for me, you can sum it up as in, if you have neuroaffirming practice going on in your classroom, whether you're a teacher, educator, teaching assistant, early years educator, whatever the role it is, your practice is inclusive. It recognises the strengths of neurodivergent children, and I would say you put reasonable adjustments in place in order for those children to access, whether it's curriculum, provision, that's all in place to give them the greatest chance of succeeding. And I think also, I think the sort of behaviour support is very important, but it's almost, you've got to put that alongside the other stuff as well, in order for that child to have the opportunity to succeed.
Oh, most definitely. And we sort of hear more and more about, certainly with the adult side of it, sort of creating space for ourselves. And I think my Instagram algorithm is just, when it's not kind of dog videos, it is sort of things like, you know, have you created space for yourself today? You know, have you kind of put this in place for yourself as a neurodivergent adult, and this and this and this? I'm sort of thinking, oh gosh, well, you know, if this is, if there's an app kind of telling me to do this, then kind of, you know, what could that look like in the classroom? And I suppose, you know, it starts right at the start of the day. And I know when we spoke previously to this, we talked about the fact that if, you know, a child is feeling unsteady coming into the classroom, or there's something that hasn't been addressed, an emotional issue, a mental health issue, then that's kind of the jumping off point, isn't it? Without sort of that in place, even as your starting point, moving on with the day is, well, it's futile, really.
Absolutely. You know, the more you get to know the children that are in your care, you pick up on what it is that's that maybe has upset them. And you can see, you know, as soon as they're walking up the path towards the door, you can see, you just know, that there's something sometimes not quite as it should be. And, you know, there could be a multitude of reasons for that. I mean, the sort of most vivid example I can think of is a child with autism. I'm thinking this is a reception child, was beside themselves in the morning. And by the time they had regulated and accessed the sort of the provision we had in place for anyone who was finding the morning a bit tough, I mean, the child said to me they were upset because their adult hadn't fed the cat in the morning before they left to go to school. So this was a part of their routine before they left the house. And, you know, when I sort of probed a bit further, you know, that was always something they did. And the fact that the adult hadn't done it, they were in a rush. But, you know, saying something like in a rush could be, it isn't clear. So those sort of phrases, and there's a multitude of phrases that we can think of, but it's when they come in, it's giving the children a chance to express verbally or non-verbally how it is that they're feeling. Because, you know, if you don't address it there and then potentially half an hour later, that behavior, as you rightly said, Lucy, could escalate, and you're having to do other stuff as well on top of it. So it's having those systems in place as soon as they come in, whether it's check-in or soft starts. I know a lot of schools do soft starts now, whether it's rather than I don't like soft starts when it's like, you know, do handwriting or phonics as soon as you come in. Soft start for me should be play. It should be play. It should be accessing things like Lego, construction stuff, even like, you know, Doll's House. I've had Doll's House with like year 3, year 4 children first thing in the morning, and they absolutely love it because it's just play's familiarity, and play, you can't get it wrong. You cannot get play wrong. So those things like the well-being check-in, whether it's, you know, drawing a face, having a number or something like that, or then your soft start. The soft start gives you the chance to sit with the children who maybe aren't feeling very happy when they come in the morning. And I know there's a big push for time and things that we have to have on the curriculum, but, you know, there's no greater sort of opportunity to connect and allow children to learn by that emotional, it's almost emotional learning, the emotional curriculum. Because you're surprised sometimes that when you have words like happy and sad, when you start to dig deep into what does happy mean, what does sad mean, some children might only think that happy is you're smiling. Well, actually, for children who are neurodivergent, smiling doesn't always mean that they're happy. Smiling could be like they're masking, it could be they're trying to fit in. And I think there's a big need there for that emotional curriculum, that emotional literacy, because it's something that, you know, there's a lot of emphasis put on emotions within the early years. So at the end of reception, you've had 2 years of focusing on personal social development, language, communication, physical development. And as soon as they get to year 1, formal curriculum in place, all of those 3 things stop. And it's such a shame because those 3 things are biologically driven. They are the things within the curriculum that are biologically driven. Literacy, numeracy, all of that stuff, that can't happen until those key things are in place.
I think it's really interesting, the masking thing, because I find that bit they're really most difficult, because my school has an SRB for autism, and in my previous school I had a highly autistic child in my tutor group, and they would seem fine. And I even spoke to a teacher this week, because obviously we're taking over year 7, so we don't know these kids very well yet. And mum's calling and going, oh my gosh, this kid is having absolute meltdowns and isn't doing very well. And we're going and checking at break and lunch. I'm like, he is running around, having an amazing day, giggling, smiling. And they're like, no, it's just masking. I'm like, is there an actual way to tell when a kid is masking or not? Is it just that they're just coping with that day and they will release it at some point, but there's no way to really know which is masking, which isn't? Or is it that masking just becomes their normal?
Yeah, the masking for me, it's trying to fit in with neurotypicals. So you see, if a child out of school presents as different as in school, I think if the child going into school will see lots more children, and they will observe what those children are doing, and the masking will happen, I think, in order for them to fit in. And things like I call it sort of social etiquette.
Oh,
I think we lost him.
We'll get him back in a moment, hopefully, if we send him out and send him back in again. Ooh.
We'll take him out.
We'll take him out. And hopefully he'll come back to us in a moment. But I think it's been incredibly interesting so far. Certainly talking about the masking side of things. Hannah, I wanted to ask you, obviously talking about that time in the morning where you can have that sort of soft start. Simon sort of explain what that would look like in primary, but in secondary, because again, it's trickier with those old ones, and again with that pressure on the curriculum. I mean, have you seen approaches to that? Do you have any approaches to that?
I mean, my school has an SRB, and they're like at a separate end to the school, and there's a separate entrance. So those kids, we have about 20 that are assigned to that one, come in through a separate door, so they don't have to come in with all the other kids. That room has, it's a couple of rooms, has sound proofing, so they don't hear all the sound from everybody else. It also has shutters that they can close down, so they're not getting everything being seen outside, or can reduce the light. There's also lots of fidget toys or areas or places they can go and just have that quiet time. So for me, that's quite an important area of the school, that they can come in and reset. The staff are there to set them up right before they then go to lessons. Sometimes they don't, like my school does the lineup, and we all line up in our zones and then walk to lessons, and sometimes those kids can't do that, so they will then wait for everyone to go in and then we'll join in slightly after. They have slightly different kind of registers as well, so they have slightly reduced timetables if they can't cope with things, and they come to the lessons that they feel like they can do. So quite often I'm like, oh, I've got an extra one, but that's because my lesson is one of those that actually they quite like and they feel comfortable, and we're like, yeah, we want to get them into your lesson. So I'm like, yeah, come on in. But I think my year 7 class is that a tutor group that I've just inherited. They are kind of, I've got the SRB kids and basically kids with SEN needs. So I've got a full bag of kids, and it's quite interesting that the amount of messages that I'm getting from all these parents going, my child is too anxious, my child isn't sleeping, my child is upset, doesn't want to come in. I'm like, they all feel exactly the same thing. And I've tried to, without kind of saying, oh, it's that kid, and been like, you guys think you're the only one feeling like that, but actually everybody in the room is feeling like that. And I'm like, I felt anxious about coming back in on a Monday, and I try and like explain to them that that's normal, that there's lots of people in the room feeling that exact same way. And I tried like a breathing technique with them as well. I'm like, put your hand, because a lot of them were saying they felt sick and then wanted to go home and stuff. I was like, because for me, if you it's also because of my pulmonary embolism, I know all about the lungs now, but putting their hands on their tummy, because I'm like, if they're breathing really shallow, they're only breathing in the top half of their lungs, so therefore they're over breathing and get loads of carbon dioxide, which will make them feel dizzy or sick. Whereas if they put their hand on their tummy and make sure they're doing really deep breaths and filling their tummy, then that way they're getting really kind of full breaths and it will calm them down a little bit. So I'm like, if you're in a lesson and you're having that panic, you can sit there under the desk and put your hand on your tummy and have that deep breath. Or you could do that before you walk into the room, or before you in the lineup. No one's going to notice. Or you can do that like before you come into school, and just try and reset yourself. It doesn't matter how many times you do it. It's just doing those little things. And I did it with them and got the whole tutor group doing it. And I'm like, I don't think there's enough of that kind of things in schools. And I only know that because I do those kind of things. And like you said, Simon said earlier, is about like everything I know pretty much about neurodiversity. Majority of it I have researched and found out for myself, or things that I have learned as I've grown up that I know work for me. Same as until I was speaking to a friend, I didn't realize people don't like have conversations in their heads like about everything that they have to do in a day, and like when you go to sleep, you don't like run through your millions of to-do lists before you go to sleep. And I'm like, I didn't know that was a thing. Like for me, that was so shocking to find out that wasn't normal. I just thought that was what everybody's head was like. And now I kind of understand potentially why I'm very good at not surviving with zero sleep. It's just normal for me. But like but also it's kind of one of those, knowing that lots of other people feel that, and I'm like, do you hear things? Do you talk? Not hear things. I'm not going crazy, but like, do you have like your to-do list, your thoughts, everything that you're doing? Are you talking through the process in your head as you're doing it, kind of thing?
It's a sign of high intelligence, Hannah. Don't worry.
Yeah, but I'm like, but actually, loads of people do, and I'm like, well, maybe I'm not as. I think maybe there's more of us among us than we realise.
The other thing I learned, so talking about the breathing as well. I've learned to tap, not tap dance. No one wants to see that, but I think it's called emotional freedom therapy, and you start tapping, and there's a whole cycle you can go through. Obviously, it's a bit more obvious than just deep breathing, but certainly, I mean, of course, we're not psychologists, we're not therapists, but you know, these techniques that all kind of, you know, there's one where you can sort of do. I think it's I can't remember what this one's called, but for those of you who are listening to this on a podcast, you're not going to see what I'm doing. I'm just tracing over each finger, and I think it's I think you breathe in and breathe out and breathe in. I think that's how that one works.
Yes, they taught my son came home with a picture of that like just at the end of the summer term. He's only 7. They've taught him how to do that one.
Simon, did any of those sound familiar to you?
Yeah, the breathing. The breathing exercises are very familiar because that's another thing that it works really well with breathing. You know, if you do, I call it shape breathing. So you go in, so going in, hold it, out, hold it, and so on. And I didn't realize how effective that was until I started sort of routinely doing that. And I think it makes a real difference when you've got those strategies in place. You've got those sort of strategies at your disposal, whether it's, you know, breathing, whether it's movement. I think movement is the pinnacle of what you can offer children. If something's not quite right, it's as simple as, do you want to go for a walk? Having like, I don't call them fidgets, I call them sensory tools. So something like, you know, people won't see this, but there's a caterpillar there that I can stretch and do whatever I need to.
Oh, it's not being used as a king.
No, this one stays here. It doesn't leave the flat. I think also, coming back to what Hannah was saying, I think people underestimate things like, you know, visual timetables for not just for neurodivergent children, but for everybody. You know, not every class I've been to has had a visual timetable in place, or it's there as wallpaper, or it's not used as it should do. Because I think there's children who look at that timetable, regardless of whether they're neurotypical or neurodivergent. They look at that timetable because they want to know what's happening during the day. They want to know the order of things. They want to know what's happening, and they want to know, is anything different? If it's different, why is it different? And I think also breaking something like maths down. Some neurodivergent children, if you just tell them we're doing maths now, that's too much. It's too much for them to comprehend. So we actually need to break that down even further into whether it's like arithmetic, and then we're going to look at how to do a calculation, and then we're going to have a go at a calculation by ourselves. Something like that, you know, we assume that that's all in place, but it isn't actually always there. And another powerful thing I found is, I think there's at least 4 parts of the day where potentially things could escalate. And, you know, it's always first thing in the morning. I'd say that period, if they've been outside for outside play, that bit that comes directly after that, after lunch, and then end of the day, those 4 points. And I found that what works with everybody is, you know, you've had all that sensory input through going out to play. You've been potentially socializing, you've been, you know, playing games and whatever. I find that, you know, switch the lights off in the classroom, mindfulness stuff, coloring, drawing, whatever you think. Take your shoes off, and then you've given the opposite of what's happened outside. And, you know, that's a winner every single time. Everywhere I go, that's a winner. And, you know, that gets questioned. Does get questioned. You know, people will say, why are you doing that? And I always tell them exactly why I'm doing that, because I feel more confident now. I wouldn't have said this like 2-3 years ago. I feel more confident now to say. I noticed that children were coming in, you know, loud, they were escalated, etc. They need something to regulate them before we start learning, because you can't do the lesson without the children being regulated. And I think that's something that's really important, that's highlighted.
I think this is so important, that we're adapting and changing, because we know there's far more children in our classes needing this. And I never heard of a visual timetable. Obviously, I'm secondary, but actually with my little tutor group, they are constantly getting lost. Like every morning I have to make sure they know where they're going. I check on them after break and make sure they know where they're going. But actually, I'm going to print out some little pictures and stick them in their timetables, and they're going to be much easier. Granted, I have teach mainly older kids. I'm like, if you see any of my tutor group getting lost, make sure you take them to where they need to be and then be late for my lesson. I'd much rather you help than ignore and be the kind one. So they're massively helping them find where they're going. But yeah, it's just something like simple like that, and putting in those steps. Like, I know that actually them seeing a picture and knowing, and then the room, that's going to be far easier for them to find than trying to read all those words and trying to work out where they're going. So I'm definitely going to steal that tip for sure, because I think these things are transferable. And I think I feel like I'm going through the whole room 101 thing, like this whole like how students learn that got kicked out about how we don't have kinesthetic learners and all that type. Like, but I think we do. And I was reading up about kind of neurodivergent thinking and how we learn. We learn far more by seeing and doing than reading. And actually, I think because everyone's like, oh, that's rubbish, there's no science behind it, you don't need to include all those variations anymore, especially in secondary school. Like, a lot of people have taken that kind of visual aspect or video aspect out, and therefore the kids aren't able to access their learning, because actually that is how neurodivergent students learn. They learn through doing and seeing. And actually when I kind of changed all of my schemes of work over lockdown and started videoing a lot of my demos and playing it on video, and then I'd have them like kind of on iPads if kids missed it, or if they weren't able to keep up, they could then just replay it, pause it and replay it. They could do it way quicker than the other kids just by watching and redoing, as opposed to if I had a step-by-step checklist of ticking off the steps, that they couldn't do, but like watching it and copying it, they could all do. So it's I do think like almost sometimes that kind of thing has kind of hindered it in the way, because actually that was helping lots of kids by making teachers have all options within their classes.
I agree a lot with that. I think that there was this sort of period, I remember earlier in my career, where it was called multiple intelligences. Like, you'd be doing things musically, moving, all of that. You'd have, millions of things going on. And you're right, it's the children who are neurodivergent or emerging neurodivergent, visuals work the best for them. And however you want to present those visuals, if it's like a visual timetable. And one revolutionary thing I found. And if you have the facilities in your classroom right on the tables, right on those tables, because that's instant access to anything that you need. Because sometimes if you're working with a child, you haven't got time to get up and get a visual or whatever, so you need to draw it on the tables. And I find that because the tables, most tables are sort of slippy and slidey, and you can write on it with a whiteboard pen, but things like that, which I'd assume is logical because you want to give child like that instant support. Sometimes, in fact, a lot of the times, that's looked on as not the right thing to do because it's different, when actually it's not different. It's meeting a need. If a child's struggling with something and I can't get to something, then I need to do something in that moment to ensure that the child's sort of anxiety level doesn't sort of increase. Because even in a stage of a lesson, you can see, I think the biggest challenge for a child is you've done all your teaching as the teacher, that move between what you've taught to then asking the children to complete whatever it is independently. They've put all their cognitive load into listening to what you're saying. And then when they move to their independent or guided task, something gets lost because they've spent all their cognitive points or cognitive load or whatever listening and taking it all in. So it's important for me that in that transition between whole class teaching and then attempting it independently, that's the greatest need, when you're going to need something like a movement break or getting up and walking around, or even like if you've been sitting for too long. Because I think if you're sitting for too long as a child, that doesn't help either. Because if you're sitting, I'm thinking of a 4-year-old sitting on the carpet for longer than say 5-10 minutes, they're going to struggle because they're going to find it physically uncomfortable. Yeah. I couldn't sit on the carpet for longer than 5 minutes with my legs crossed.
Even doing this, and it's kind of, I'm very conscious now of how I'm sitting because I've got on my sofa, actually cross-legged at the moment. Very, very, very neurodivergent of me. But no, I think the sitting thing is really interesting. You just made me think of a couple of things. Using all that cognitive load in listening. I don't know if you've heard of spoon theory. Where they're just out of spoons.
Mm-hmm.
Used up all the spoons. That was explained to me actually by my my best friend recently, and she had to break it down for me because I didn't understand what it meant. And now I spoon theory, out of spoons. And the other thing, the sitting thing. I don't know if it's so much of a problem in secondary, Hannah, but some of the ways these children, school furniture is crap, as we know. School furniture is not conducive to anybody. Those chairs, I'm sorry, are hideous. The plastic, they're just, no, it actually makes me contort just thinking about it. And I kind of got to the point with the way children were sitting where I said, as long as, you're not kind of squat on the chair like a little frog, like, no, we're not having feet on the chair. We're not having feet like that on the chair. You want to sit cross-legged on the chair? You want to kind of, whatever you want to sort of have, as long as butt is in contact with the chair. And that seemed to be a fair sort of compromise, not your feet sort of dangling over the back. Some of the things I've seen, I'm just like, please just don't crack your face on the table. And I don't know about secondary and sitting. Is that
It is, in the fact that, like, I think because they have to sit, it then moves into their hands and they can't not have something into their hands fiddling, which is where like the slant thing comes into. I've got some kids, like obviously my school does slant, so they have to sit up straight and listen and make sure they've not got anything in their hands and stuff. But some of those kids just physically cannot. And I don't think they're not conscious that they're picking the thing up either. Even when you give them a warning and like, don't pick that up, like leave it there, put it down, like it will be up there 2 seconds later. And I just don't think they notice that they do it. But I don't think, my classroom is probably the worst of them all because I've got stools, so even worse. But I guess like they're kind of moving around in between, so it's a moving break. But I definitely notice, like when I have inset and I'm sat on those chairs for like a couple of hours, granted like maybe an hour or two, and then we have a break and we can walk around, but my God, am I uncomfortable. And I don't know, I don't think like it's very good for any kind of kids really for that amount of time. I don't know. Maybe that's all why we're all old and creaky, that we've had to sit on these chairs so long. I mean, my son's got one of those fidget circles that you can kind of wiggle on, but he's like literally, and he'll sit there and wiggle, and it's the only way he'll sit still is if he just sits on this little wiggly kind of circle, because he just can't help it. Like, he's just got so much energy, and I know he does. Like in the summer, he will literally surf for a couple of hours, come out, eat food, go back in for a couple more hours, come out, and I'm like, right, your lips are blue, you come out, and he'll be like, no, go back in. He just never runs out of energy, and he can't help that. But just having that little thing where he can just sit there and just correcting the balance kind of means that he'll actually sit there and really concentrate. But he's not distracted by the wobbling. It makes him focus, which is quite an odd concept. It's like the opposite, really, isn't it? I think that's why some people don't quite understand like how the opposite can have a positive effect.
Yeah, I think what you said was really important, because I think it's important to distinguish between behavior that's sensory seeking as opposed to behavior that needs our support. So, if a child's is sitting on the carpet on a wobble cushion and they're wobbling around, but they're still engaged with what you're teaching and they're engaged in the learning, I don't see a problem with that at all. But yeah, if a child is sitting on the carpet and they're visibly distressed about something, then there may be something different that you need to do there. And I think it's a fine juggling act. We're observing the kids constantly about what they're doing and what they're giving us, and then we almost have to react in the moment. Sometimes we're seeing potentially sensory seeking behavior, or we might be seeing more distressed behavior from neurodivergent children. We might, suddenly the child might, get up, they might run around, they might run out the classroom. And, looking at that, it's still adopting that the mindset of that's communicating something. Yes, they've gone out and they're running somewhere, which means for me, that's a response. That's the flight response when we talk about different reactions. And it's, what do you do? If a child's running around, I wouldn't run after them, because that's not going to get us anywhere. But I think it's important that when the child, particularly a neurodivergent child, is doing something, I think we've got to approach it in a very curious way. So what are they doing? Yes. So, you talked, Hannah, in the secondary school, your class, children picking things up. I think that's indicating a need for something. They've just got to have something in their hand. They've just got to do something with it. And I found it interesting that, do you know Ellie Middleton, the author of, she's done a brilliant book called How to Be You, where she talks. Yeah. Yes. I watched a clip of her on TikTok, and she talked about the sensory tools and how she sees them being used in different ways according to your neurotype. So if you are autistic, you might use a fidget tool in a very routine-like way. You might just do it over and over again in that particular way. But if you've got ADHD, you need to keep your hands busy. You need to use them in whatever way you want. So I think it's almost the culture that we have within our classrooms needs to be, the children are presenting us with these behaviors. They're not doing it on purpose. They're not doing it because it's not personal against us. It's biologically driven. And I think the challenge is for us in the classroom, particularly when we have neurodivergent children within mainstream, it's that balance between managing to keep on top of providing for everybody, but realizing that children who are neurodivergent or emerging neurodivergent, they need something else. And I think the challenge is trying to not to do minimal work, but to do stuff that's easy enough to implement, but allowing that time for the children to settle with it, if that makes sense.
Oh, most definitely. I want to come back to you and ask you something about fidgets in a moment, but we're going to take a quick break first. So have a sip of water, have a wiggle, have your own brain break for the moment.
Break.
Have a movement break. I've got the wiggles now. So we'll be back with you in a moment.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. John Catt have an exceptional collection of book titles that cover a range of educational topics, ideas and research. The books are aimed at forward-thinking schools and support best practice teaching for both primary and secondary education. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order.
How can you show your students the opportunities that await them? How can you fuel their aspirations and motivate them to achieve? Futurum Careers provides a wealth of stimulating resources aimed at encouraging 14 to 19-year-olds to pursue careers in STEM and SHAPE. We help you to show your students what they can aim for and how. From articles to activity sheets, animations to podcasts, all our resources align with Gatsby benchmarks and are free for you and your students to download. Visit futurumcareers.com and subscribe today. Futurum Careers, helping teachers to inspire the next generation.
And we've also got Reading Solutions UK as well as one of our sponsors tonight. They're the home of Dreambox Reading Plus, the online reading development program. Creates stronger readers from in your school from Key Stage 2 to beyond GCSE. Reading Plus evidence-based adaptive technology. Reading Plus accurately assesses your students' skill gap and places them on a personalised learning pathway to build to accelerate their strength and improve on their areas for development. You can try the programme with a free 4-week pilot today. Search Reading Solutions UK to find their website and request your free pilot.
Fabulous. So lots of great sponsors there. So coming back to fidgets. Now, even as an ADHD myself, I go back and forth with this one because I fully see their use and I fully appreciate them, except for maybe fidget spinners. Do you remember those? That was a fad a while ago, wasn't it? Oh, gosh, memories. But I've certainly had situations, and Simon, I think I mentioned this to you when we spoke previously, where I've been denied giving certain children in class fidget toys because I've been told, well, if one has one, then they'll all want one. So just forget about it, Lucy. I'm thinking, okay, well, that's not going to work. But could it work? I mean, is there a situation where, having fidget toys or having things to occupy the hands, and I'm talking primary at the moment. I don't know what Hannah's feeling about this would be in secondary, but certainly at primary level, is that a problem? Is that an issue?
Well, as a visiting teacher, I carry heaps of fidgets or sensory tools around with me because I know you never know when you're going to need them, and it's difficult when you're doing day-to-day supply because I could be going to a different classroom every single day, and I've seen it work, and I've done it with whole classes, and I think if you're planning on using them with children, then you've got to be really clear on why and how you're going to use them. I think it's important that if you've decided to use them, I think you've got to teach the children how to use them and what they're for, because if you don't do that, then you're going to run the risk of your classroom going into absolute chaos. You're going to have everything going left, right and centre. It's going to be absolute chaos. But, having the tools there and demonstrating to them, because I mean 2 years ago I wouldn't have used fidgets at all, but now I carry them around with me. I go through different phases about what I have, and I think it's important that you allow time for the children to experiment with them. So I literally put them all out on each table, let them use them however they need to. Mention safety, because you don't, with this one, this caterpillar, you don't want to be swinging that around because danger of hitting someone or whatever.
I worried earlier.
But I think you need to explicitly show the children how they use. So if you're angry, for example, you might want a stretchy fidget or sensory tool, because stretching it, because you're angry, you need to stretch it to get all that energy. Or you might use a stress ball when you're angry to sort of squeeze it as hard as you can. But then if you're feeling tired, you might use one of those like a Rubik's cube or an infinity cube, because it's keeping your hands busy at the same time. And then you might have things like I have these little lavender bags that I bought from IKEA on a whim, but a couple of the kids like the smell of it. But then it's always best to check with these things with something like that first. But I think once if you've chosen to use fidgets or sensory tools as part of your classroom, it's modeling and using them, how we use them, because I think there's some cases where it's just the neurodivergent children who have access to the fidgets or the sensory tools, when actually, if we're talking inclusion, we actually need to think about, well, actually everybody's going to want them, and actually why shouldn't they have them? Because potentially you may get a neurotypical child coming into your class in the morning absolutely in floods of tears of something that's happened, which is maybe out of character for them. So maybe one of the things we might offer them is a sensory tool, or the what's it called, those sort of big cuddly toys. Is it a plushie? Yeah, one of those that they squeeze and they hug, and to get that sort of compression, that that need for them. Oddly enough, I mean, hugging is not one of my things, so I just don't like it at all. It's one of my things. There's only certain people that I'll hug and allow them sort of into my sort of personal space. But yeah, it's established the culture of why we use them, how we use them, and then making the expectations clear. So I always say, if it's a class I'm only having for a day, I always say to them, I'll be deciding if a child needs one. Don't come and get them yourselves. Or I might say, only use it for yourself. Don't go sharing it around to everybody, because you're getting this. Because I've noticed, for example, you might be chewing your jumper, for example. So that communicates to me there's some need there, whether that's go and have a drink of water, or whether you need a snack of some sort, or whether you're moving your legs around and you're sitting on a chair. I might put like I call it a gym band on the bottom of around the chair, so you can move your legs at the same time as maybe you've got a fidget, so you're getting double vestibular and proprioceptive input there. But I have seen sensory tools or fidget toys introduced successfully, and if they're not, it's that dilemma of if you want to do it, part of me thinks you just do it and get that evidence together for when you get questioned by your senior leaders about why you're doing it. It's that thing about here's the issue. So the issue might be children aren't fully engaged. The implementation bit is you're going to put the fidgets or the sensory tools in place. The impact is better engagement, which is what senior leaders love. They love an evidence base. They love that you might have you've got it all together and you know what you're talking about. Yeah, it's all that evidence base. Why are you doing it? If you can point to research and evidence, then you're on to a winner.
I think that's really interesting, because I've never heard of the band around the chair before, and I'm like, oh, I've got one kid that could be quite good, because in secondary school you can't really have them to the same extent. Some of them do, but they have them in their pockets and they kind of use it in their pockets, or they kind of do it under the desk. They have to do it out of sight. And sometimes it's just not enough. But I quite like the idea of the band. I'm literally like, I've got a few of those lurking around that aren't really being put to their proper use, that could be used. So and I think it's really interesting hearing you talk about how doing it for all of them, because I think for education for ages it's been like, oh, we scaffold down, we scaffold so these kids can kind of reach the other kids. But actually, kind of we did it on our show, didn't we, the other week, on what fads are out and what's in. And the new term is adaptive teaching. Like, we need to adapt and change and do it. But the whole thing is that it's not just for a couple of kids, it's for all of them. We're adapting for all of their needs, and then we take away the adaptations once they've got the hang of it. So actually, should we be adapting to all of the kids in the classroom and giving them all the opportunity? And then maybe that makes our classrooms even a safer place, if every child can then see the benefits of having a little fidget toy, and could they concentrate better if they needed it, and maybe they'll think that other kid is less weird for doing those different things or needing something in their feet and their hands. If they understand how it can have a positive effect on them, I think it's one of those, like, we need to normalize it rather than these kids being this separate entity. And actually, like, we're all on the scale, aren't we, really, in some points? It just depends how much you talk to yourself in the head, I guess. But it's kind of like how much we cuddle in our cuddly toys. But like, I think it is one of those that we just need to make it a safe space for all the kids, and that it's fine to feel like that, and kind of get, especially I think there's a big thing. I'd love to hear your opinion on, Simon, on girls. Do you notice the girls now that you're more aware of it? Because girls mask it far more than boys, and ours is kind of more internal monologue, isn't it, than external kind of fidget. So I'm curious, because I think I've had some students before. I remember saying to one of my tutors, and she was like, "Do you think I could have ADHD?" I'm like, well, you're not overly hyper, but actually that's not a sign in a girl. And I read through it all, and she's like, I am all those things, miss. This is a GCSE student. I'm like, yeah, you are. And like, I remember her went home and spoke to her mum, and then her mum went through the process, and I had to write kind of references to the doctors and stuff of what I thought. But all the other like teachers just thought she was naughty, and I was like, she's not naughty. She's actually quite clever, but there's just, she's very forgetful, or she zones out, or she has outbursts but doesn't actually really remember what on earth she said. And I was like, I don't think she can't, because I had taught her at a previous school that she'd been removed from and transferred schools, and I happened to transfer schools to the same one. So I was like the one person she knew, and I'd seen her behaviour in both settings, and I was like, this isn't something she can control. She's a good kid, but there's just other stuff which, like, yeah, can you see it in the girls so young, or is that it's just when we see it much later, when it comes through as really severe anxiety and really struggling to cope in certain situations?
Yeah, I agree with that. I see that, I'd say sort of 5-10 years ago, it was boys all the way. I wouldn't have recognized girls at all having any kind of neurodivergency. And I think now it depends on, I think, the environment that you create for the children, linking to your point about creating safe space for those children. If someone chooses to unmask in your company or your presence or whatever, I think that person that you're doing it to, you must really trust that person to be able to do that. And I remember a few years ago that I did have there was a girl, and it was there. I could see the traits of I could see special interests. I could see I would call them neurodivergent play styles. So things like not just lining up, because lining up is the typical one that people look for. It's assumed that if you line things up, you must be autistic. Well, actually, neurotypicals will line things up as well, or you could line things up and have OCD, or all the other neurotypes as well. But I saw things like you'd go on the slide and go again, but when the adult's there, again, up the slide, again, literally must have been 10 times, 20 times, 30 times. It's that repetitive rigidity of play that they really enjoyed. And I think with girls, I think I can see it better now. I can see it more now. But I think I agree with you that there's masking there from girls, and it's either in school they're seen as well behaved, and then when they go home the mask comes off, and all the after school restraint, it's almost you've been restraining yourself all day masking, and you're at home, and it absolutely all comes out through a meltdown or dysregulated behavior. And it's interesting that, I probably wouldn't fit all the typical, autistic or ADHD things, because I'm not driven by a motor. I'm constantly on the go. But when I read through the statements for when they sent the assessment stuff through, you could tell which statements were the autistic statements and which ones were the ADHD statements. And actually, I fitted more of the ADHD statements, which I wouldn't have said that at all when I did my referral, because I overthink a lot. I'm constantly thinking about things. Even in our conversations tonight, I've mentally thought of like 3 or 4 things to sort of scribble down for later to do something on. Or, when you mentioned that, at night when you go to sleep, you're overthinking stuff, you're getting things together. Sleep is one of my worst things. I find it really difficult to sleep for more than, say, 5 hours. If I get that 5-6 hours. But I think now it's the environment that you create in order for the children or adults even, because let's not forget, I think within schools, there are neurodivergent staff that work at schools as well, which may not have realised. Yeah, exactly. Got 3 people here.
Like a summit meeting. It's great. I love it.
I find that really interesting what you said about the repeating thing, because actually, I'm not going to lie, it was actually a student that triggered me to kind of really start realizing that I do have a lot of traits. And I started to think I had a little bit of ADHD, but I didn't think I was on the other end of the spectrum. But the kid was going through my GCSE class. He was going through the kind of processing, and she was asking me questions about me and just saying to her, she's like, "Oh, miss, are you one of those type of people that just listens to a song on repeat?" I'm like, "Yeah." And I was like, "I will literally listen." And I know I've done it. I've downloaded a new song. I've listened to it 3 days solid. Every time I'm in the car, I just repeat that one song. Nothing else plays, just that one song. And I'm like, I just thought it was just me, and that actually I just really love a song, and then I'm done, and then I move on to another song. And I just thought, I didn't realize that wasn't normal. I was like, I just really like that song. I'm like, oh, I'm getting to know it. The beat's really cool. I love knowing I can now karaoke it. I'm good. And but I did not realize that was a full-on trait. And she was like giggling at me, going, "Miss, you're way more than just dyslexic, let me tell you." And I'm just like, I just didn't. Then like listing off the things from her questionnaire, and I was like, oh God, you might be right here. But I just think it is that kind of thing. Like, there's so much more, and we don't fit into one or the other. There is this kind of real range. So it is really important that you don't kind of box a kid in, because actually a lot of the kids will potentially be over multiple different boxes with it. But and I think it is that kind of thing, like having that open dialogue with students. Like I openly, like at my old school, we had a secret dyslexia society. It was me, the English teacher, and the science teacher, all very dyslexic. So when the kids go, "I can't do it, I'm dyslexic," I'm like, "So am I." I'm like, even the English teacher's dyslexic. You've got no excuses here. And we have like out loud reading, and I literally will go, "This is my idea of hell. I'm going to read it. I'm going to say words wrong. Please don't laugh at me when I pronounce stuff wrong," because they like good books with really tricky names and places and weird words that I've not heard before. And but I'm just like quite open with it. I'm like, I'm just going to go with it. I'm doing my best. If you guys want to take over at any point, please feel free. But it's just having that safe space that and kind of letting them know it's normal. Like if I'm freaking out, they're going to be freaking out in the classroom as well. And it's kind of adapting it. But I've also made notes because, and I was like, so
there would be tangents, didn't I?
Because my thing is that obviously a lot of them generally tend to be hereditary, don't they? So if we're finding that students have got kind of one of these neurodivergence, are we now kind of working out, obviously like a bit like to the extreme that I have, that actually a lot of the parents that we're dealing with have these, so they don't necessarily see that it's abnormal and not neurotypical because they're not neurotypical themselves? And is that we actually need to educate the parents on what it is as well as the students, and potentially that could help the student with their life and their routine if we kind of, as I know schools already have loads on and we already like do everything else, but actually does there need to be more, maybe it's something the government need to do, but actually looking at kind of every kid that has or is getting a diagnosis or is going through the process, do we test the parents as well and kind of get information for them or out to them?
I think, you know, if we're talking about partnership, which is the foundation of, you know, the classroom, then, you know, I think parents and carers are going to be sharing stuff with you that they've noticed at home. They might say, I've noticed my child does this at home, or my child does that at home, or whatever. And I think it's for us to, you know, it's creating that environment, that, again, that safe environment where the caregivers and parents can come to you and say, I've noticed this, what do I do? Something like that, you know, because parent, you know, being aware of what you can do about it. You know, the path to getting an EHCP is treacherous. There's a lot there. I've been through the process of getting a child an EHCP, and I didn't realize how many steps there were even before you send, you know, before you send the stuff off. The amount of detail that the local authority want for that child is something else. And, you know, we need to, you know, it's almost coming back to what we talked about first thing about that, you know, the terminology that we're using around, it's not SEND, we're talking neurodiversity, we're talking neurotypes. It's that sort of language now that, yeah, we almost need it sort of cohesively, that everybody is using the same language. And coming to your point about, you know, hereditary, I think, yeah, if you're using this language and you're describing this sort of traits to the parents and caregivers, you know, it might sort of connect something together. Parents may say, oh, I do this or I do that or whatever. So it may bring a lot of meaning to it. And as I said before, you know, I think it's people who are particularly in their 30s and 40s now who are realizing that they have neurodivergent traits, who are self-referring themselves. I remember when I spoke to my GP, he said after 5 minutes, right, I'm referring straight away. I'm referring, fill in this form, send it off. And that was it.
No, it is interesting. And of course, adult diagnosis is a whole different thing as well. It's always been baffling to me. And again, I saw this somewhere, isn't it? So I can't take credit for the original thought, as it were. But we're told, you know, to adapt lessons and things for students, as we rightly should and do. But ever sat in a staff meeting that's been adapted or been kind of, you know, sorted in any way? No, you haven't. Next thing I wanted to ask is sort of in thinking about all of this, you know, we're sort of creating a very kind of idealistic situation where you've got, you know, this lovely approach where you have time in the morning to settle children properly, go through all the emotional and mental health things that we need to. Maybe everybody having finished choice and all the rest of it, but you're going to get a lot of people saying, well, hang on a minute, you know, you're taking away from their education. Well, what's all this kind of hippie nonsense? What do you mean you're going to kind of take learning time away to do all of this? You're almost overcompensating. You know, why are you is all this really necessary? I actually want both of you to answer this, because I'm sort of thinking, what is the kind of backlash that could happen? Because there always is backlash, particularly when you talk about subject matter like this. It's kind of, isn't this all just a bit over the top? You know, Sam, what do you say to that?
Yeah, I've heard it. You know, I've heard it. You know, why are you doing that? It's different. They should be doing this. They should be doing that. Or I've heard it all before. But, you know, the thing is, particularly with neurodivergent children, you have to realize that there's a difference there. There's a difference in the way that they operate. You know, I operate differently to other people. You know, when I get hyper focused on something, no one's bothering me at all. I'm getting on with what I'm doing, and I might have gone down a rabbit hole I might be reading a load of books about children's play, for example, and I might forget to eat, I might forget to drink, I might be doing all of this stuff.
Do you wear noise cancelling headphones?
You know what? I do have noise cancelling headphones, but funny enough, when I work, I have
The
to have
little
music.
loop ones.
I have to have music on in the background while I'm working. Sometimes it's classical, sometimes it's like rave music, techno music. I have it all going on, but it's just what I feel. You know, it's just what I feel at the time. You know, if
Thrash metal.
I haven't gone down that route. Yeah.
Sorry,
But,
carry on. I'll be quiet.
I think it comes back to something that we were talking about before about your evidence base. You know, if you're going to do this stuff, you've got to be absolutely certain about why you're doing it and how you're doing it, because you're going to get questioned by a teaching assistant in your classroom who doesn't like it because it's different. Your phase leader might come in and say, what on earth is this? What is going on in here? But actually, if you have the confidence to sort of follow that through, because if you're lucky enough to have a child who is neurodivergent and they have an EHCP, there is no argument there. That's enough, that's what that child should be doing. But if we're talking about true inclusion, we're not just talking about neurodivergent children, we're talking about everybody. And, you know, I had a thought earlier that when we're thinking about inclusion, we're not just thinking about the children being included within the learning, we're thinking about the visibility and recognizing those children as well. We're talking about the fact that, you know, even something like, you know, when you're doing story time, there are an increasing number of children's books now which have neurodivergent characters in them. And it's really important for me that whether you're reading, you know, children's books about whether the main character has autism, or again, if you're reading a book about, there's a wonderful book that I read, it's called Hair Love. This isn't actually, it's about a neurotypical child, but it's about consent, and it's about, you know, the child doesn't want them touching their hair. They don't want I don't want other children to be near them, whatever. And it's almost, we're running two different sorts of curriculum. We're running the academic curriculum, but underneath it, it's the well-being pastoral sort of curriculum that actually, you know, when I did teacher training, it's called the hidden curriculum. Well, actually, it shouldn't really be hidden at all. It should be absolutely out there. But I think in essence, it's about you being confident enough to say to others, this is what I've noticed, the evidence, this is what I'm doing about it, and this has been the impact, and no one can argue with that.
I found that so interesting. We hadn't really touched on hyperfocus. I find hyperfocus is like our super like power, like the ability to do that. People don't get it, that like how you can do that. And I love the fact that, and me and you, Lucy, every time we come up with an idea for a show, we go down a rabbit hole. It's like, oh, you down the rabbit hole, I'm down the rabbit hole. Here's the things I found in my rabbit hole. How's your rabbit hole looking? And it's just, I just love the fact that's now our normal. Like, it's not abnormal for us. You're on the same level. And I've got a friend, I'm going to shout out Martin, my friend Martin, who is both on the spectrum. And I find it hilarious because he brings out my side way more, and literally we will have conversations about 10 different things all at once, and I'm like, anybody else listening to us is like, what the hell? But we will literally talk about, like, we'll talk about work, we'll talk about socialize, we'll talk about hobbies, we can literally do it all at exactly the same time and literally jump from one to another. And for us, it's just, we can follow each other along, and it's absolutely normal. And sometimes finding that other person, so maybe pairing up a pair in the classroom that are on the same level and that can get it and actually can kind of boost that. I feel sometimes in my classes, potentially my hyperfocus and my rabbit holing, the kids play on it a little bit in the fact that they will ask me questions and I will go off on that tangent. But in my subjects, so I teach art, we've got disciplinary knowledge coming on the Ofsted kind of guidance, and I love that bit. It's all like the theory and the questioning behind art. And like even this week we're talking about history of art, and we look at Paul Giovanolopoulos and the fact that he steals everybody else's art ideas and does his art in the style of lots of different famous artists through time. And is it clever or is it just cheating? And one of his pictures on the Mona Lisa, so then we disappeared off down the tangent of why the Mona Lisa became famous, and that actually it was Pablo Picasso got accused of stealing him, but he didn't actually steal him. And but I find when I have those kind of lessons and I talk about it, it's the classics. They are slightly setted at my school, but it's the kids with the neurodivergence in the class that have way better questions and way better discussions than the top set ones. And I'm like, I wish the top set ones were asking me the questions that you are asking. I'm like, that is a great question. That's so interesting. That's so different. That's a great way to look at it. And I just think actually there's so much good that can come out of it that it's not encouraged enough. And that's why I think I like the oracy trend when it came around, because I'm like, actually this is somewhere where a neurodivergent child can actually thrive in the right situation, because they can show their passion and show their excitement and kind of really go for it and enjoy it. And I don't know, I just think, is there enough room for that in education? Because you have to essentially, to have those conversations, you have to take something out that's not necessarily going to be written down in the book in an extensive way. We kind of have to make room for it. And I feel like that's the way education is going. There are so many more kids that are neurodivergent than we ever thought that there were. And is it going to continue? I mean, there's a whole nother rabbit hole as to what is creating that, whether it be that actually they're getting worse or fueling it with kind of screens and that addiction and that quick pace, or as Joe Wicks, I mean, obviously it doesn't come from food, but obviously the processed food that they eat can make it worse than other days. So there's so much more to it, but potentially there are different levels of it that aren't necessarily being kind of are basically fueled a little bit higher levels based on society and how things are going. But the thing I'm throwing up, I wanted to end on like a little bit of a happy question, but I feel it might be a rabbit hole. When you look at like successful people in life, they tend to be neurodivergent, like your Justin Timberlakes and or what have you. All the really successful people that have worked really hard seem to have done really well, but they all quite often say they struggled at school or didn't do well or failed their GCSEs, but yet they seem to have absolutely thrived afterwards. So how do we get these neurodivergents that are clearly very intelligent, that they can thrive really well in life? Why don't they thrive in school? And what needs to change in school that they can thrive earlier, and that it's not this kind of 10 years of absolute battle to then kind of suddenly get through that hardship and grow? That's the bit in my brain. I can't work out why it's suddenly different after school to in school.
I think it's almost, you know, if you are neurodivergent yourself, if you are a neurodivergent teacher, I think because you had the lived experience of being neurodivergent and knowing and having the experience at school, it almost fuels it more. Because the way you just spoke, Hannah, about that child at school, that was me. You know, I struggled a lot at school with lots of different things. The social stuff, I struggled with, you know, retaining stuff. You know, my GCSEs were middle of the road. My A-levels were middle of the road. And it wasn't until I got into teaching, when I started teaching, that I noticed that something was different. Like I loved teaching. I loved, teaching the kids. That's where I found my sort of calling, as it were. And I think that there are lots of things there that it fuels it along, in that, you know, if neurodivergent children want to talk to you about their special interests. You know, I remember a child quite recently who one of their special interests was a thing called Kirby. Kirby used to be on like the Nintendo back in the day, but this child wasn't there back in the day. But this child would think of nothing. Like, I'd be in the middle of teaching, he'd get up and say, "Mr. Airy, I want to talk to you about Kirby. I want you to talk about Kirby now." And that's quite difficult to stop, because in a way that child trusts you and wants you to know, and you've given off those, I'd say you've given off those neuroaffirming signals that you value these children. But again, it's putting in, again, it's, you know, if a child comes up to you in the middle of teaching, that's not appropriate. That's not needed at all. So it's that balance between, you've got to reaffirm the boundary or the expectation there, because if they are neurodivergent, they should still have things in place about what we should and shouldn't be doing, but obviously underpinned by our knowledge of the child. And I think there's almost, you know, I think of particularly like the early years curriculum, and the things like there's early learning goals at the end, and they were written for neurotypical children. They were not written for neurodivergent children. So neurodivergent children could not meet all of those goals at the end of reception. So therefore, when they go into year one, they're already seen as, in the data, way behind to what they should be, when actually, as we've all said, there's such a lot of strengths there. It's the way neurodivergent children approach something, or the way they interpret something, or how they play, all that open-ended stuff that I suppose I'm saying is that if you give children the open-ended stuff, so whether you're giving them, rather than telling them how they have to do it, giving them the choice in how to do it, probably will bring you a lot of, it would make us think actually with how neurodivergent children present the learning. So they might present it through, they might have an aversion to writing, for example. So actually we find another way for them to communicate. So whether it's through drawing or whether it's through acting something out, all that stuff we were saying earlier about the multiple intelligences. But I come to the fact that that's hard. That's hard to put all, if you've got 30 different children with 30 different ways of accessing, that's difficult. That's really difficult.
It is, and it's there is still such a, and I think there are good things coming through, things that we've talked about this evening, approaches that we know are happening that are getting introduced more readily, and there is sadly still a rigidity to the curriculum and to what we need to include both at primary and secondary level. And maybe what needs to happen is a little bit of a loosening to incorporate more of these things. It doesn't have to be everything in one go. And of course, there is a staffing element as well. If you're alone as a teacher with 30 kids, it's not going to work. You do need additional support in class to make that inclusion and make that whole thing work. But I do, this conversation has certainly made me hopeful and given me ideas as well. I don't know about you, Hannah.
Oh, 100%. I've got some bits that I'm going to go use with my little tutor group and make them less anxious and make them feel more normal, because they are still normal kids. Like, they shouldn't be treated differently and made to feel different. They should just made to feel like they're part of it. And actually, like I said, but that there's so much strength, and I don't think the strengths are celebrated. It's more like, this is what this kid is going to has, and this is the issues you're going to face trying to teach this kid, as opposed to, this is this kid, this kid is amazing, this is what they're capable of. And actually, our SRB lead did an amazing session at Inset, introducing us to our kind of new neurodivergent kids that are coming into year 7, and was like, right, he's like, this kid is incredible. They will, I'm going to call it now, 9s across the board at GCSE. No, I'm saying it before you guys have even met them, and I've only met them once. But it was like, but they very much need everything to be routine. And if anything is out of the routine and inconsistent, they will pull you up on it and ask, why are you doing it that way when everyone else has done it this way? So it was, the onus is on us to make sure we're consistent for that child to be able to thrive. Otherwise, they will kind of really struggle with that. And I think, like you said, like finding those things. I mean, I know more about trains than I care to, and all their different whistles and stuff. But also, I think that's like you said, it's why I love teaching. And I think that's why I'm good at what I do. Because in my art room, when they get to independent projects, I make them try and find something that they're interested in. And then I can just really make that absolutely flourish and make their whole art project about something that they really care about. I've got a kid that we started his new independent GCSE project today, and he's a massive eco warrior, and actually wrote to Keir Starmer about how he should improve the eco in schools and things, and got a letter back and stuff. And I was like, right, we're doing a whole project around this, and we're going to use Robert Rauschenberg, and we're going to use his Earth Day poster, and you guys are going to create your own posters based on this. And it's finding what makes them tick and giving them the go to wind them up and let them go, because it's quite magical to watch. And I think I hadn't quite clocked it until you said it, Simon. I'm like, that is why I'm really good at what I do, because I'm able to see the bits that other people don't see. And that's why when I've had meetings with SLT and be like, how come this kid is getting 3 grades higher in your subject than any other subject? Why are these kids? I was like, they love my subject, and I make it about them, and they're going to go on and study it. Like all those kids that are way above the line are all going on to do it at A level, like, because this is their happy place. This is where they're safe, and this is where they're doing about something they love. And I think that's like, I know I rant on about the arts and the importance of it, but like,
as you should.
But it's finding that space, isn't it? And I suppose there isn't enough time in my class to be able to do that. But I'm like, how many lessons? I think I found out that like PSHE, they get 2 lessons a week on that. It's like, if we had 2 lessons a week on art, my gosh, the mental health I could help, let alone kind of the other stuff. It's just, I mean, I've done the shows on kind of what the core subject really should be. So 5 hours of art a week if it was me. But I've also done like the neurodiverse shows. I did teaching with dyslexia, and I had my English teacher friend on, and we chatted about that. And like you said, we talked about the fear of CPD as teachers, of being given reading to read and then ask questions about it. We both skipped to the end and read the last chapter, last paragraph, because to pretend that we'd read it, because we were so petrified of being asked questions. Like, that fear doesn't really go away. So it's like teaching them how to cope with it, as opposed to teaching them that actually around it and not with it. I don't know. It's been so enlightening. It's almost like I feel like my brain is going to explode. There's so much, and like all my notes that I've written down as I've gone through of everything, because I'm like, I don't want to forget that. I don't want to forget that. I really hope this isn't like my phone of doom. But like, are we all screenshotters? I'm like, I'm going to come back to that. I'll remember that. But I put this one in my special remembering place, so it'll be fine.
Simon, any final points before we wrap up for this evening?
I think probably the 3 sort of takeaways I would urge people to do is, know your children, know their interests, know what makes them tick. I would let them move, because movement is the pinnacle of what we need to be offering them. And, just think about the environment, think about what it is in that environment that maybe you need to adapt, or maybe you need to change. Is there too much of something there? And listen to the child. Listen to the child. They'll tell you through their behavior and what they communicate, what it is that they need. And if you do all of that, then they'll have a great chance of thriving.
Well, fantastic. And I think that's a great point to end on. But before we go, just a quick final reminder of our sponsors for this show this evening. We have John Catt Educational, who still have a lovely discount code for you, which is JCTTR2425. That gives you a 20% discount across the website, and you can see the website along the bottom there. We also have Futurum Careers, who provide a wealth of stimulating resources aimed at encouraging 14 to 19-year-olds to pursue careers in STEM and SHAPE. And they help teachers show their students what they can aim for and how. If you want to know more about that, you can go to futurumcareers.com. And finally, Reading Solutions UK, which is the home of Dreambox Reading Plus. And for more information on that, you can search Reading Solutions UK to find the website and request your free pilot. So once again, I'd like to offer huge thanks to Simon Airy for joining us this evening. I truly appreciate you giving up truly appreciate you giving up your Tuesday evening, and hopefully you'll join us again for another show in the future. But other than that, Hannah, anything else to add?
No, it's been a great show. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody, and we will see you again next week.
Outstanding, a world-class vision, a world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused.